Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Mike's Geek Corner with your host, Mike Quevedo. Let's talk about Frank Castle's first cinematic iteration in 1989's The Punisher, directed by Mark Goldblatt, starring Dolph Lundgren in the title role, along with Academy Award winner Lou Gossett Jr., released by New World Pictures. When we look back at the era between the late 80s and very early 90s, like 90 and 91, mainstream-wise, there were probably four prominent comic book movies: Tim Burton's Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Dick Tracy, and The Rocketeer. These four made a solid mark with audiences and/or critics. Films like Superman 4 and 1990's Captain America were doomed the moment they decided to make them by cutting corners, when these are two bigger-than-life superheroes that require an epic scale of commitment. The less said about 1988's Return of Swamp Thing, the better. And then there's 1989's The Punisher. It is a film that has its footing a little more on the side of 80s, small-budgeted, but crafty, dark cult classic actioneers like Escape from New York, The Terminator, and Highlander than a high superhero spectacle. And why shouldn't it? The Punisher was, after all, Marvel's answer to gritty vigilante novels and films back in 1974. And during the 1980s, with most of the big-budgeted comic book movies from big studios like Alexander Salkinds' Supergirl, George Lucas's Howard the Duck, and Dino De Laurentiis' Red Sonja resulting in massive failures with critics, fans, and the masses, it might have ultimately been for the best that Marvel's lethal vigilante be left in the hands of New World Pictures, an independent studio that had previously released such modest-budgeted but creatively executed films such as The Philadelphia Experiment, House, and Hellraiser. While by no means perfect, The Punisher 1989 has just the right amount of pulp value to make it a decent Punisher adaptation, as it echoes some of the comic work of Archie Goodwin, Tony DeZuniga, Frank Miller, Stephen Grant, Mike Zeck, Mike Vosburgh, Mike Baron, and Klaus Janson. And maybe more importantly, it is also a very stylishly directed film that exudes a bit from the best of cinema, such as Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, Mario Bava's Danger Diabolik, Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter, and John Woo's action films. While the movie takes certain liberties with the source material, such as the lack of the iconic skull on his chest, Frank Castle being an ex-cop as opposed to a Vietnam vet, and the absence of some of the comics' recurring characters, such as Frank Castle's ally and weapon supplier, Microchip, and villains like Jigsaw, Hitman, or the Kingpin, Mark Goldblatt's inspired direction combined with Dolph Lundgren's performance as a brooding and vengeful vigilante, and the solid foundation of Boaz Yakin's script, make the picture a very compelling experience. If Conan fans can appreciate John Mills' Conan the Barbarian for its outstanding merits despite a degree of detachment from the source material, I imagine Punisher fans can have an easier time appreciating Mark Goldblatt's The Punisher. And if you are able to enjoy seasons 1 and 3 of Daredevil, or for that matter, The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, with Matt Murdock's alter ego in a total black attire as opposed to his horned red outfit, you should not have a big problem with Frank Castle sporting a skullless Mad Max biker look. After famed film producer Roger Corman sold independent studio New World Pictures in 1983 to Larry Cupin, Harry E. Sloan, and Larry A. Thompson, the company acquired Marvel Company's parent company, Marvel Entertainment Group, in 1986. Among the spawn of this acquisition came three Incredible Hulk spin-off TV movies that aired in the span between 1988 and 1990, featuring Thor in the first film and Daredevil in the second one, as mentioned earlier, an X-Men animated pilot called Pride of the X-Men that aired in 1988 on the syndicated anthology show Marvel Action Universe, and of course the first live-action feature film version of The Punisher. By this time, the Punisher comics were among Marvel's bestsellers, starting with Circle of Blood in 1986, and then launched to his ongoing title in 1987, and a second ongoing book, Punisher War Journal, in 1988. Coming off the success of the first two Karate Kid films, writer-producer Robert Mark Kamen began a development deal for a Punisher treatment in 1987 with New World after his pupil, fresh graduate screenwriter and longtime Punisher fan, Boaz Yakin, delivered a script for the Punisher that captured the tormented psyche of Frank Castle towards his vengeful crusade. In the comic, the Punisher's wife and two kids are killed after accidentally coming across a mob execution while on a picnic in Central Park. But for the film, it was decided to have the hit of Frank Castle's family be the cause of a direct target by organized crime. Hence, Punisher having an adversary in the form of original character Jenny Franco as the lethal vigilante's ultimate aim for his quest of vengeance, serving as the film's main context. For this reason, it was also decided to have Frank Castle be a decorated police officer prior to his tragic loss, and eventually do away with any mention of his Vietnam service once Lundgren was cast, as he had been a bit too young for a Vietnam vet. Yakin and Kamen, however, had creative disagreements, which consisted of a dispute of Yakin wanting to showcase the title character's origin in a later flashback sequence in the film, as opposed to Kamen's idea to begin the movie with the origin. And while Yakin insisted that Frank Castle sport his trademark skull logo by being spray painted on his Kevlar vest during the climatic sequence, Kamen dismissed the idea as he thought the skull logo would seem too comic booky. Ultimately, Boaz Yakin was dismissed from the project, and Robert Kamen did a final draft, rewriting the dialogue and structure of the script, which included adding a 7-minute origin sequence at the beginning and removing the inclusion of the skull logo worn on Frank, but still making its presence as a handle of the Punisher's knives. The skull vest would be kept in the climax in the comic movie adaptation. The 17-minute origin, though shot, was ultimately edited out after an initial screen test, and the movie instead began with the Punisher already established 5 years after his family's death, so to keep the character more mysterious. Once Robert Kamen's uncredited rewrite got approved by the studio, Mark Goldblatt, who had previously worked as an editor on such 80s milestone action films like The Terminator and Rambo 2, as well as second unit director on RoboCop, and had just finished his directorial debut with the supernatural horror action comedy The Heat from New World, had finally accepted to direct The Punisher, after initially finding the title character in Boaz Yakin's script a complete psychopath, comparing him to a heroic Jason Voorhees, and was now satisfied with a script that presented Frank Castle with a dimension more to his liking. Goldblatt also read some Punisher comics for preparation. In recent years, Goldblatt has stated that it was a miscalculation to not have had the Punisher wear his iconic emblem, although he still remains proud of his film. The film's budget, which was around $11 million, wouldn't have allowed for the movie to be shot in New York, which is where the Punisher's comic book exploits take place primarily, and so it was decided that the film be shot in Sydney, Australia, through a film company New World had funded called New World Pictures Australia, and used the urban locations to give it a sense of it being somewhere in the Pacific Northwest of America, though not specified. For the title role, actors from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mickey Rourke, Steven Seagal, Chuck Norris, and Kurt Russell had been considered. French-American actor Christopher Lambert, who had previously portrayed the enigmatic and enduring mortal swordsman Connor MacLeod in the aforementioned Highlander, was close to being cast as Frank Castle after a talk with the producers got his interest, which pleased not only Goldblatt, but Punisher co-creator Jerry Conway. As it turned out, however, Lambert injured his foot and would not be able to complete his recovery in time for the film's commencement, and so our search for the Punisher resumed. And feeling they needed someone who looked intimidating in height, could act, and be able to handle the pressure a natural flick of this caliber demanded, Goldblatt and New World set their focus on 6'5" Swedish import Dolph Lundgren. Lundgren certainly had proved to be a phenomenally looking specimen in the films Rocky IV, Masters of the Universe, and Red Scorpion, looking very much like a comic book superhero come to life. But Mark Goldblatt still had a reservation as far as the Swedish accent Lundgren showed in the 3 films mentioned. But when the director got to meet his soon-to-be lead star, he was surprised to find out Lundgren spoke very fluent English. While the title of the movie made Lundgren hesitant initially, as it sounded to him like it would be something derivative of a film like The Terminator, or 1980's grindhouse cult favorite The Exterminator, once he read the script, he accepted the part. Lundgren dropped 25 pounds of muscle mass and dyed his hair black and made it a 5 o'clock shadow so to resemble his comic book counterpart. The design of the facial stubble also gives him a skull-like appearance. He got heavily into the character by not talking to anybody on the set, and kept to himself, and also read some of the Punisher comics. He also performed most of his own stunts, and this was also the first film where he got to showcase his martial arts skills. For Frank Castle's former police partner and friend, Lieutenant Jake Berkowitz, Lou Gossett Jr., who several years prior had won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in An Officer and a Gentleman, was cast to bring prestigious support to Dolph Lundgren's relatively novice lead. Dutch actor Jeroen Krab resumes villainy after playing a James Bond foe in The Living Daylights as mafia boss and orchestrator of the death of Castle's family, Johnny Franco. From displaying gentleness in the show St. Elsewhere and the telefilm John and Joko, A Love Story, Kimiori makes a sharp turn in the role of Yakuza leader Lady Tanaka. Though a younger Nicole Kidman was in talks for the role, actress Nancy Everhart, at the recommendation of Friday the 13th director Sean Cunningham, was cast as Sam Leary, Jake Berkowitz's companion in tracking the Punisher, after having worked with Cunningham on Deep Star 6. That same year, she also worked in the aforementioned Trial of the Incredible Hulk as Matt Murdock's assistant. And Shakespearean Australian actor Barry Otto portrays the Punisher's homeless informant Shake, who also has a flair for the dramatic. 5 years have passed since police officer Frank Castle has been considered dead, along with his wife and 2 daughters, in a car explosion triggered by Franco crime family Lieutenant Dino Moretti. And since then, a mysterious and elusive self-styled vigilante called the Punisher has been executing countless members of organized crime. As Castle's former friend and partner, Lieutenant Jake Berkowitz, attempts to track down the Punisher, whom he suspects is Frank Castle himself, bent on a personal vendetta, Mafia kingpin Johnny Franco, whose power has been somewhat reduced after the Punisher killed his main enforcer, Moretti, along with a number of associates, finds himself in a sticky entanglement with the head of the Yakuza, Lady Tanaka, who, through threatening means, proposes to Franco to form a business partnership with the Yakuza. And when the offer is denied, Franco's son and the children of the other crime bosses are kidnapped by the Yakuza. Will the Punisher stand by and let the two warring crime organizations destroy each other? Or will the memory of his two daughters motivate him to unleash his vengeful wrath on the dangerously resourceful Yakuza and rescue the untainted children of his sworn enemies? After contributing to such projects as the Battle of the Planets anime series and Howard the Duck, composer Dennis Dreith fills the Punisher with a musical score that encapsulates an appropriate grim and violent atmosphere. It somewhat evokes a similar gloom and doom chilling feel to Danny Elfman's Darkness score. The Punisher was released theatrically in France, Germany, Japan, Spain, and Great Britain in the fall of 1989, but in America, due to New World having gone bankrupt shortly after the film completed, The Punisher did not get a theatrical release. New World sold the film to Live Entertainment, an outlet that specialized primarily in direct-to-video films, and The Punisher was released in home video in early 1991. It has also been suggested that because Dolph Lundgren's previous film, Red Scorpion, did poorly at the box office, that gave the distributors a cold feet in releasing The Punisher theatrically. Though it had some positive reviews abroad, most reviews were mixed to negative when released. The Punisher got shade from critics by being called mean-spirited and generic. Still, The Punisher has over the years garnered an increased appreciation and cult following. When someone like Quentin Tarantino expresses his admiration for this film, it is made clear that Mark Goldblatt's The Punisher got more right than it did not. I first knew of this Punisher movie via an ad in the instruction booklet of the Punisher NES game, which I got for Christmas in 1990. I actually hadn't read any Punisher comics at that point, but rather had read the Spider-Man comics that featured the Punisher as guest. It was really the NES game that gave me the intro into the character's real name Frank Castle, his origin, and his comic villains like Jigsaw and Hitman. When the movie finally came out on VHS and rented it, I totally enjoyed it. Again, as I had not read the Punisher in his own comics at that point, my only real base of knowledge of the character and his world was the video game and a couple of Spidey comics. And even though I didn't see any of the villains from the game in the movie, and of course no skull on the chest either, I still enjoyed it very much. I guess it was a kind of movie I had grown to love, like RoboCop 1 and 2, American Ninja, Avenging Force, Cobra, and Cyborg. And Dolph Lundgren, who I had already enjoyed watching as He-Man in Masters of the Universe, was a total sight to behold. Even without the skull on his shirt, he had such a commanding presence that made the lack of skull motif on him be an unintrusive afterthought. He very much looks like Frank Miller and Mike Sex's rendition of the Punisher come to life, and he also brings an effective balance between being a strong force to be reckoned with, while also displaying layers of someone with a tortured soul. In other words, Lundgren's Punisher owes a little more to Frank Miller's apocalyptic and hermetic Batman in The Dark Knight Returns than he does the comparatively more adjusted character appearing in the Punisher comics in the late 80s. Then, as mentioned earlier, we also have his impeccable physical prowess as he performs most of his stunts. And then there are the fight scenes where his awarded martial arts skills showcase an impressive display of power that made me think rivaled Van Damme's material. I did think back then it would have been even better if they had used a villain like Jigsaw, Hitman, or other of the more gangster Marvel villains like Wilson Fisk, Silvermane, or maybe a more subtle version of Hammerhead. But as time went on and realized how complicated the issue with acquiring rights could be, especially back in those yesteryears, and also began discovering more Punisher back issues, over the years I've come to appreciate how, in spite of the absence of comic book elements, the foundation of Boaz Yakin's script still carried with it a recognizable and appreciated comic book sentimentality. Where in the Marvel Preview Presents number 2 story, Death Sentence from 1974, it was a Costa crime family that was behind the murder of the Punisher's wife and 2 kids. In Goldblatt's film, we have the Franco crime family behind the death of Frank Castle's family. And just like in the magazine, Punisher also stalks the Mafia members in tactical, deadly ways. Jeroen Krabb as Johnny Franco effectively displays both the methodical and cunning behind-the-scenes mastermind crime lord aspect of the comic's much less syndicate boss, Frank Costa, as well as his compassionate side for family. The iconic Kingpin Wilson Fisk may not appear in The Punisher, but Kim Miori as Lady Tanaka certainly portrays the Yakuza leader with the kind of patience and cold reserve that is associated with Fisk. The calm demeanor and physical strength she exhibits in the presence of Boss Franco is something Wilson Fisk would do towards other crime bosses. As for Tanaka's Yakuza enforcers, they very much operate in a shadowy ninja aesthetic that calls to mind The Hand in Frank Miller's Daredevil run. Lou Gossett Jr has the world awareness and feet of clay of a James Gordon, and the police activity done by him and his partner involving the manhunt of the Punisher bears the investigation showcased in Death Sentence, done by Inspector Hamilton and Captain Morgenstern finding out about the Punisher's past, as the Vigilante seems connected in the assassination of a number of ex-military men. Barry Otto's thespian vagrant Shake clearly does not have the luxuries that Micro has in the comics with high tech in order to provide Frank Castle with information, but what Otto does bring to Shake is a type of charm found in Moon Knight's own thespian homeless informant Bertrand Crowley, along with sardonic humor. Now for the Punisher's cinematic sway. Fritz Lang's film noir crime movie The Big Heat, from 1953, deals with a homicide detective who, despite being on suspension, becomes even more determined to solve a murder after his wife is killed by a crime syndicate by a car bomb. This is reinterpreted in The Punisher, with Frank Castle also losing his wife and 2 daughters to a planted bomb in their car, and hence taking the law into his hands and avenge their deaths. Frank Castle coming in between 2 feuding forces of organized crime is something that can harken back to Akira Kurosawa's masterpiece from 1961, Yojimbo, which sees a Ronin also becoming a twist of fate between 2 rival clans for control of a village in 19th century Japan. Mario Baba's 1968 comic book adaptation, Danger Diabolic, which features a notorious black-clad outlaw pursued by both the law and the underworld, makes its impact on the Punisher in the artisanal set design, particularly the establishments of both the Mafia and the Yakuza. Some of the set designs from Baba's sci-fi horror film, Planet of the Vampires from 1965, seem to serve as an inspiration to the set design of the sewer hideout where the Punisher dwells. Clint Eastwood's 1973 western High Plains Drifter tells a story about a mysterious unnamed gunslinger arriving in a corrupt town, carrying with him a hidden agenda as a trio of vicious outlaws make their return to the town to terrorize it. The way Frank Castle dismisses justice to some of Franco's thugs is very much in line with how Eastwood's Stranger deals with the bad element portrayed in his film. And there's also a little bit of a John Woo-like aesthetic in the execution, no pun intended, of the action scenes. Which shouldn't be a coincidence, as a lot of the Australian technicians in The Punisher had also previously worked in the action films in Hong Kong. As far as making the jump to celluloid, the Punisher property really has had it better than other IPs. In its roster, the Punisher franchise doesn't have a Ghost like Conan the Destroyer, a Return of Swamp Thing, a Superman 4, a Batman and Robin, a 1990 Captain America, a 1997 Spawn, or a 2007 Ghost Rider. The Punisher has had 3 movies so far, and though far from flawless, they remain very watchable, and each competently captured a piece or 2 of what makes the Punisher so compelling to so many fans. The 2004 Punisher with Thomas Jane is a Leon-like, romanticized loose adaptation of Punisher Year One. And 2008's Punisher Warzone with Ray Stevenson is this very fun, ultra-violent, almost Sin City, grindhouse-like cartoonish take that celebrates the dark humor of the Garth Ennis Punisher comics run. The Netflix show, starring Jon Bernthal, is clearly what could be called the Punisher's highest point of excellence in live action, certainly in conservative terms, as it goes for a more realistic road, a la the Bourne films and American Sniper. But what about the film at hand? Well, I think The Punisher 1989 is a film that seems to get brighter as time passes. In the early days, the attitude was, oh, it's messed up because he's not wearing the skull emblem, and now after a little more than 3 decades, it's not as bothersome. For we know it is the Punisher Dolph Lundgren is playing. And the film itself is a story that has a quality that looks like it could have been directed by someone like John Carpenter or Walter Hill. And while it also has its technical goofs, like a lot of those on-budget independent action films from that time had, it's not a factor that should detract you from enjoying its kind of cinematic creative juice, and also a taste of 70s and 80s comic pulpiness. So if you're a fan of the black and white, Bronze Age comic stories of the Punisher, Frank Miller material from the 80s and Circle of Blood, as well as James like Mad Max and Darkman, the 1989's The Punisher awaits your viewing. I believe it is available on YouTube. If you're a physical media glutton like myself, you should find the 1999 DVDs from Artisan and the 2016 Australian Blu-ray release from Umbrella Entertainment, which features interviews with Dolph Lundgren and also an interview and commentary with director Mark Goldblatt. Both should be available on Amazon or eBay. And speaking of Blu-ray, I just want to mention the very cool cover featuring a very cool illustration, which I think solves the skull problem of being too comic booky by placing it instead as a belt buckle. Pretty neat. And that's it for this review. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, please give it a like. Please make sure you subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave your comments below. And until next time, I'll be out here, recording, editing. The geeks will be entertained.